Hello, everybody. My name is Sil the DM, and we are back in the frontier, my dudes. Picking up where we left off. Echo, our delightful rogue, vanquished the weird Oblek creature, the Oblex creature, with a dastardly stab of their rapier, ending the fight. At which point, the party quickly saved Navat, who was once again down on the ground unconscious. We are almost guaranteed Navat has spent more time in session unconscious than awake um, at this point, between being down for fights and being asleep. Um, and so at this point, everyone was pretty wounded and really just wanted to get the heck out of here. Picking up, they didn't heal Navat. He was just stabilized with a healer's kit, um, which I don't entirely enjoy the way they work in 5th edition, but whatever. I can change that later if need be. At which point, um, they picked up Navat and began to squeeze their way out of the cave system, eventually making it back to the original tunnel where they had found the Oblex creature with the 3 dangling clones. Here they spent a little bit of time gathering the supplies and sort of divvying that out, before making their way back through the rest of the mine carefully, making their way through the water and the Roth and back up towards the proper system. Along the way, they did notice a carrion crawler, busy sucking out the delicious carrion left behind with their fight with the cave fishers, and the few centipedes that it looked like that they had already killed had already been fed upon. However, they kept far enough away and as non-threatening as possible, and the crawler seemed more concerned with the food that was already dead. Eventually, they skirted their way back out into the mine proper, and made their way up top, eventually finding the foreman, who noticed them and how beat up they looked, quickly getting one of the very limited amount of healing potions the mine had on reserve to wake up Navat, who woke up very excitedly going, "Did I win?" Um, as he was woken up and then knocked unconscious, and that was the fight for him. Um, and it was at this point they quickly explained what had happened as fast as possible. They brought up the illithid and that the other 3 miners had something implanted in them. And the foreman, whose name is Dustwallow, I'm pretty sure. Yes, Foreman Dustwallow, quickly evacuated the mine. Sort of skirted the players to the side to let the miners get out, and then went up with them. When he got up on the top, the chief of staff, the dragonborn named Riza Ralbeck, came over to him to try and figure out what was going on, why the mine was being evacuated again. And the party gave her a very quick explanation, and suggested that she post guards. And she took that to heart, and they saw some of the miners who were with Riza switching out of their mining gear and putting on plate mail. Sort of going through exercises to sort of shake the muscle memory of swinging their pickaxe, and instead picking up their warhammers and mauls, and just sort of getting their bodies into a different physical state. At which point, Dustwallow anxiously escorted the party through the city, which alone took several hours, as the city is quite large, and it involves going up layers, as each layer of the city, which is sort of 3-tiered, is divided by like 25 feet worth of steps and rampways, which are fairly wide, ranging to sort of make it so that people who might be disabled can more easily get up and down them. So they're a very shallow incline, is what I meant to say. Um, they eventually made their way up to the second level, which is where finer artisan goods are made. The majority of the churches are. There is a large square with a fountain. And at the edge of this second level, there are more farms, but these fields grow almost exclusively vegetation and primarily rice. And the water from these farms runs off down into the ranches where the livestock is kept, the crocodiles, the frogs, and the like. On their way up top, they were getting the feeling that Dustwall was very anxious and nervous. Um, and he very, very pointedly asked that they let him do the talking. And when they got to the top, they ran into Brigitte and her gnome bodyguard, Fizzingun. Or Fizzlegun? Fizzingun? I have his name here. Fizzlegun. Um, and it seems she wanted to stop Dustwallow to figure out what was going on, to get a better read of the situation so that they could more properly handle it. And the whole party saw Dustwallow like tense up and sort of straighten his back, clench his hands as if he was making some internal decision that was very important to him. And very quickly shot her down and just sort of moved past her. At which point he started to sprint to get away from her before what he did caught up to him. They made their way through, and we're discovering that up here in the highest tier of the city, the nobleman's district, beyond a large-looking official courthouse-like building, um, the area was mostly small communities that are gated, that almost look like miniature towns. Each gate sort of encompasses many buildings, some actually looking like shops, workhouses, and residential areas. These are probably where the noble families keep, and each family probably has access to almost all the amenities they need, just within their own bordered off area. They were also noticing a distinct tri-mixing of cultures. The more Western European style, which is more familiar to this particular part of the world, as Helfdom, this continent, is very equatable to being like northwestern Europe, to Canada. It has that style to it. It's very far north. They have very long winters, a lot of stone and wood buildings, large furnaces, um, smokestacks, very squat, um, not overly extravagant, but extremely purpose built in utilitarian buildings. Um, but beyond that, they're also noticing a lot of dwarven style housing with rounded roofs close to the ground, probably are multiple layers beneath the earth, with just a surface layer at the top. And a third, which is more familiar to Vanya as being a more eastern style. The houses that the humans of Ultan would use, which um, is a little more common to Vanya just because the Duke of Vanya's duchy, New Wharf, is currently led by a man named Duke Zhu Yaoming, I believe his name is, whose family is from the Ultan dynasties, um, which are not nearly as powerful as they used to be. Before the Duralian Empire, they were their own independent thing, their own sort of state, and they battled against the control of the Empire for a very long time. That was eventually put out pretty late into the Age of Peace, and they were enveloped into the fold of the Duralian Empire. And with some events that happened in the past, they found themselves significantly weakened, much to the dismay of the Duralian Empire, as having the powerful dynasties of Ultan at their control, gave them a very significant advantage over the elves of that area, as most of the continent of Ultan is elven controlled, except for the western borders, which are controlled by humans. Uh, though those wars aren't going on anymore. Politics can still be a little tense between the Empire of the Moon and the Duralian Empire, but open war isn't a thing that's happened for almost 100 years at this point. And Vanya was just noticing a lot of buildings in this style, and they were eventually brought to the main fortress, the main keep, which was this massive Japanese style palace, almost, with very wide ranging buildings sort of built within inner walls. And they could see a lot of connecting tunnels connecting different parts of the buildings to each other. Inner gardens and whatnot could be seen. Um, they stopped at the gate for a moment, where Dustwallow spoke quickly to one of the guards, who went a bit ashen faced and ran in to sort of figure out what he's supposed to do, as people just aren't allowed to walk into the Duke's palace, if we want to call it that. Though I'd imagine the Duke would refer to it as a fortress, or just his house. Um, After a few minutes, and Dustwallow very pointedly trying to make sure that they let him do the talking, um, the guard came back and collected them. Again, looking quite ashen-faced and now heavily winded. Dustwallow led them through the fortress, taking them through many of the corridors to lead towards a room where the Duke seemed to be waiting for them. Outside, they found a pair of guards and a courtier, a blonde dwarven courtier with a long robe, sort of like a dark blue, a very well braided platinum blonde hair. Um, and this figure went to announce them, to which part they heard the voice of the Duke cutting him off and demanding they be let in immediately. So, taking a deep breath, Dustwallow led them into a very small room with a U-shaped table. Inside this room, they met the Duke. Duke Reinhard Pietvein. Um, a perfectly average heighted dwarf, um, who was a little upset, to say the least. Um, and they quickly learned that the Duke was not like their idea of a Duke, perhaps, as he was very off the cuff, and just upset and stressed, and finding out the details from all of them made him very concerned. And they could tell that he was very quickly trying to formulate plans, talking about getting the militia together, getting the military armed, sending for aid or to warn the other duchies around. As it appears, the Duke had been attacked by a Mind Flayer in his youth, when working in one of his family's mines. As those who are from Umoven know that Duke Pietvein, his family controls three of the largest mines in the duchy, including the new salt one here in Vinheim Fields, which is the name of the capital, but also the one that Shay used to work at. And he seemed to have recognized that that was her, and it did sort of pull him out of his anger and upsetness for a moment to see her. And they get the feeling that beyond just being someone who's not afraid of work and someone who believes in doing your fair share no matter what your position is, the Duke seemed to be very, very anal about the protection of his miners and potential things like cave-ins or illithids and other monsters. Um, and there are rules in place that if someone goes missing or something like this happens, that things are handled properly. And the party started to get the feeling that Dustwallow and Birgit were trying to take this matter into their own hands just to try and maybe alleviate some stress for him. But it very clearly didn't work out that way. Um, And very quickly, the conversation went through a whole lot of very specific things. At one point, the Duke forbade Dustwallow and Brigitte from seeing each other for a month. Um, he offered to pay the party, and the money of which he paid them with was Brigitte's monthly allowance that her father gave her, and not just some of it. He demanded she present all of it, which was, I think, about 200 gold a person, about 20 platinum, which had her very ashen faced and humbled for the moment. And the Duke seemed very intrigued with the idea of cutting her back on her allowance and instead giving her a job, and suggesting she perhaps take up a trade or mining like he used to do, um, which also seemed to concern Brigitte. And through all of this, they got the feeling that the Duke was just tired and stressed, and this was a whole lot of triggering things that he wasn't expecting to have to deal with today. But for the most part, everyone seemed to have a positive reaction to him. For the most part, it was at this point that the Duke offered them a bit of assistance. He could tell that these strangers to his lands had probably been through a lot, and he offered to hire them to go send a message, basically, to deliver the warning to the Duchy of Carandal, which is the next duchy over. As Carandal and New Wharf sort of take up the coastline, and Umoven Swamplands sort of is inland more, almost landlocked. Technically, there's water in the north coast, but that's pretty far away from Vinheim. And the party didn't seem uninterested in getting out of this city for a little while, and just taking a breather and just not being surrounded by frogs or illithids. Seemed a bit enticing. So they offered to think about it at least, and he more ordered than invited that they spend the night there. Um, and the group at this point took a little bit of time to recoup, get changed, have a bath, clean themselves up, take a short rest, because they were all still fairly hurt from their excursion into the mines. And it was this point that the group went shopping to pick up some things. We ended up going to several shops. They went to a place called Williard's Ceramic, which was led by a bald elven woman who wears like a big heavy leather apron, as Vanya wanted to get a new mask, as their mask had been cracked. Um, Passing by the church to Jericho, they also visited a shop called Strikes, which was a weapon shop, and it was here that Nevat purchased a new quarterstaff, as his had shattered against the Ublaks. This one reinforced by metal, a sort of metal rod down the center of four intricately woven wooden trees, like pieces of wood. Um, Very clearly sort of magically coaxed into the shape. Um, Beyond that, they also went to an alchemist shop called the Silvered Lily, where they picked up a few health potions, if I'm not mistaken, and not much else, as it appeared to be quite busy. The Silvered Lily being a place uh, that specifically tends to grow herbs and stuff for medicine, that is normally sort of reserved for the doctors of the city. They sort of just have contracts, and they just make things constantly to fulfill those contracts. They're not really that much of like a walk-in shop. They're more like a wholesale retailer, if that makes sense. Um, and I believe that was it. I believe the session ended with that little bit of shopping, and everyone hitting up the few places they needed to go. They were about to head back to Williard's Ceramic to get the collected mask of Vanya's when we ended the session. And that's our recap. If anyone has any questions or comments, please get back to me in the comments section below. I'd be happy to help. Again, sorry this was late, and I'm sorry if it feels, a little rushed. I got a lot on my plate these weeks. I'm just trying to make sure I don't fall too far behind. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to playing more D&D later. Still out.